Welcome to San Joaquin Spotlight, a public affairs program featuring conversations about life in the central San Joaquin Valley. This program is brought to you in partnership between KFSR 90.7 FM and CMAC Fresno. I'm your host, Sevag Tatiosian. The studio is buzzing with activity as we are recording San Joaquin Spotlight this week in a unique fashion. We're doing it on Skype. The first time we've done it, San Joaquin Spotlight has been around since 2006, and for the first time we're utilizing Skype to do the interview. So for that, I would like to take this opportunity and thank all of our volunteers for making it happen. Our guest is, I should say, Fresno's own Armen Nalbandian. He is a world-famous piano player, jazz musician, you name it, he'll do it. Armen, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Savak. I appreciate it.
You're originally from England, and from England, somehow you made it to Fresno, and now you're in Los Angeles with family ties in Fresno. How did you get from England to Fresno? Big difference, wouldn't you say?
I would say it was definitely a harrowing experience as a 9-month-old baby from Manchester, and came out to the East Coast, New Jersey and New York, and then to Los Angeles, where I mostly grew up till about the age of 13 or 14. I went to high school in Fresno, and later returned to Fresno once I moved away again to do the Fresno Art Museum Artist in Residency that we had there for several years.
Armen, you're a fairly young guy, and when you were growing up and you wanted to be a musician, you wanted to be a pianist, did anybody discourage you, or did they tell you go for it?
Well, I think just in general, being in any of the arts, especially in the United States, there's a little bit of encouragement that occurs when you're really young, but the older you get, the more serious that you get. I think sometimes there's a level of discouragement because everyone really feels that it's, I wouldn't say everyone, but I would say a large percentage of the population might feel that it's a lofty dream and not something that is a typical profession or even something that would be a typical passion for somebody, especially like a musician or a jazz musician of all things. And yeah, there is a fair share of discouragement, but I think that's what separates those that do it from those that don't, or the ones that persevere past that.
So a lot of other musicians or writers or even actors and actresses, they would say, I would go into my room and I would practice. And when people said don't do it, I would go to the room and I would practice. What's your story? I mean, when you practiced, which I've seen you on videos perform and you're very good, where did you practice?
I practiced in my family's living room on the piano that we had there. It didn't start out to be a piano. My folks, my mother and father are such amazing people. They're very warm-hearted, and they have a very strong passion for the arts and for music specifically, with my father being interested in like Frank Sinatra, and that's what I heard when I was younger. And then also my mother, who would make sure that we knew about the Italian operas and stuff like that. So once I took an interest, and this was fairly young, maybe 12 or 13, in being a jazz musician or playing the piano, you know, we ended up getting a grand piano in the middle of the house, which I'm sure drove them crazy for several years throughout my high school time as I would practice. But to answer your question, during lunch periods in high school, I would sit in classrooms and do homework and get all that stuff out of the way so that when I got home, I could spend all my time on the piano.
Talk about Fresno. Is Fresno a good place for people like you or artists to practice? I mean, are there venues for you to go out there and show people your talent?
That's a great question. There have been in the past, and I'm not so sure that's the case any longer. That's not to say that there isn't a certain level of interest in even like club owners and stuff, but I don't think the Fresno landscape is necessarily suited for the type of expression that at least a musician like myself strives for. And the reason why is a lot of times the jobs of the people that work in Fresno are very much where time you hit the weekend, you just want to have a drink or like go to the game or something like that. But to sit and listen to a 2-hour jazz concert, even classical music or whatever the case is, that's not the reality. Um, and so, though those that have done it, that have come out of Fresno, or there are a few that are still in Fresno, they've done it because they've created their own program, or they've created um, their own mechanism in which they can get an audience and retain an audience so where they can be successful. And it's not to say that there isn't. There's a lot of people that are very interested in the arts in Fresno, but I think it more has to do with the businesses that support that than anything else.
So how could we as a community keep people like you here? I know that we're going off some interesting topics here, but we hear this all the time that Fresno's losing their young people. Fresno's using their young people. And when I interviewed you for San Joaquin Spotlight years ago, I was like, this is awesome. We've got this kid, this guy here, and he's known throughout the world. He's helping with Hurricane Katrina, which we're going to talk about, by the way, a little later on in the program. And then when I heard that you left, I was like, oh, I wish we would have kept him. But I understand, because you need to be in a place like Los Angeles or New York. So going back to my question, how do we keep people like you in our community?
I think that there's a saying that talent goes where it's rewarded. And I think that's the same no matter who you are. If you're a basketball player, you're going to go where you're rewarded. And whether you're a composer or a musician, you're going to do the same. And that really is the sad state of affairs a lot for cities that don't have the infrastructure that a city like New York or Chicago or Los Angeles, San Francisco, cities like that have, where there are the venues for creative-minded people, And I think a lot of that comes from the school districts, to where when I was growing up, there was a lot of support for what I did. I mean, I'm a jazz musician, and that's a rare thing to be supported by a school district, especially school districts that really support athletics more so than anything else, which is great. And I'm a huge sports fan myself, so that's not lost on me. However, there's a lot of fine artistry that goes on, and from everyone I've known that has lived in the Valley, that has sought those things, even the ones that are still living in the Valley, I think the majority of the gigs they perform as professional musicians are outside of that. So I think really it's just a matter of being appreciated where you're at, and really being appreciated at the same level that you'd be appreciated in any of those other cities.
You've accomplished a lot in your young life, from Hurricane Katrina relief, where you raised funds and performed, to partnerships and collaborations. Where do you want to go? I mean, are you on the path that you want to go? What's next for Armen Nalbandian?
I think it's about just perfecting what my art is. And obviously, there's no perfection to that, which makes it really exciting. It's not where you climb to the top of a mountain, and you feel that you've reached the goal in jazz, and especially in creative music, or you being an artist in any regard. You're always striving for that, and that is really being true to yourself. And when you have those things that you want to express, being able to do that on your terms and not and not on anyone else's. And that's just true success for me. And it's how I define it at the moment, at least.
Somewhere right now there's a child that's in the living room of their parents' home, playing piano and dreaming that they can make a career out of this. What advice would you give them, and what would you tell them?
I would say, well, first of all, good luck. It's tough out there. And not to be negative or anything like that, it's very difficult to be an artist in any capacity. Even for the most successful, I'm sure, it's very, very difficult. But I would say don't give up. I'd say stay focused. And if that's truly what you are passionate about in life, then stay with your passion. Don't be discouraged by anything that anybody says, because they don't know. And what existed at one point, where there's a lot of gatekeepers in the record industry or whatnot that really try to control what's successful or not, that's really not the case anymore. We're in a new paradigm in which you can dictate that. So for the youngsters out there that want to make that difference, what you have to do is stay focused, work very, very hard, and you just can only hope that the adage that hard work pays off still remains true.
Talk a little bit about your latest CD because a little birdie told me that you have a new album out, and that album just came out. So talk a little bit about the album, what can people expect, and where do they get it from?
Mm. Yeah, Little Birdie was correct, and it's an album called Time Waits. Time Waits is my ninth record, my ninth album, and my very first solo piano album, which seems like it may be overdue in my discography, but if you ask any jazz piano player, that's really something that you tackle um, when you feel ready, because it is a very exposed medium to just be in the studio with the piano and being in control of all that stuff. It's not as easy as just playing in your home or something. It's like you're really trying to express something that's from your heart and your soul. So that is definitely the crux of what Time Waits, my album, is about. There are all original compositions. In addition to that, three compositions that I reworked and provided my own interpretation of, and those are Thelonious Monk, who is a great inspiration of mine, his song Ugly Beauty, and a song by Hoagie Carmichael entitled I Get Along Without You Very Well, and a modern song by a band called Radiohead, which I assume that many people are familiar with.
Yes,
it's a song called Motion Picture Soundtrack. And this is the first of two solo piano albums that are coming out this summer that I'm releasing. So my 10th album, also solo piano, will be released in a couple of months from now. Available on iTunes or wherever else you buy your music, it's available there.
If I go to the music store, if I go to some of the places where they sell music, will I be able to find your work and some of your older work? Because you've been doing this for a long time.
Well, I certainly hope so. Yes, all of my music. Last year I turned 35 years old, and for my 35th birthday, I re-released my entire catalog. So it's all out there. There's 9 albums that are waiting to be listened to and appreciated, hopefully.
Tell us a little bit about how the booking process goes for you. Let's say that I in Fresno want to have a event, or I want to help you by introducing you to the community who doesn't know Armen Nalbandian. How does that work? Do you have an agent, or are you doing all that stuff yourself?
Well, I have a team of people that assist in various capacities. I've tried to stay away in recent years from making it too much of a production, because I think it takes away from what the genuine artistry is. So a lot of times I like to get involved in a lot of it myself, whereas that really wasn't the case 5 or 6 years ago. It really went through a lot of channels before it even got to me. But yeah, there's a website just like everyone else would have, which is armennalbandian.com. It's very simple, and there's email information on there where we can be contacted, and it just has to do with it being the right venue and the right setting for the work. And then it's just a matter of the arrangements and availability.
Tell us what the average day is for you. A lot of people work 8 to 5, 9 to 5. They clock in and they clock out for lunch, clock back in, work the remainder of the day. But for musicians, I suspect that that's not necessarily the case. So enlighten us on your world a little bit.
Well, I think in general, a lot of musicians work that 9 to 5, and then they do another 8-9 hours dedicated to their art. At the moment, I'm fortunate where that's not the case for me, where I can just be a creative individual. So a lot of times, and along with a lot of parts of my career, is very much being inspired by the arts, no matter what that is. So very much a typical day is wake up in the morning and have breakfast, and of course a delicious cup of coffee, which is a prerequisite to any good day. And then I really try to stay in a very inspired mindset. And where I live in Los Angeles right now is very close to the museums. It's exceptionally close to the museums that I love, like the LACMA. And then we have a lot of great art down here. So it allows me to just go and spend hours at the museums and really being inspired by that. And even though I don't do the same type of program I did in Fresno with the Fresno Art Museum, I still am very inspired by art, and I've always been. And so that means also going to the opera if I can, or the ballet. And for instance, I saw a great production of Porgy and Bess in downtown Los Angeles a week or two ago. so it's just really being in a very in an environment that's very creative and very inspiring, and that also goes with going to see music as well, no matter what it is, not just jazz, but anything really, anything I like. And then a lot of that also is those things. I don't think that music is necessarily inspired just by music. I mean, it's by, or even just the arts. It's about being a human being in our society. And I think that's the truest reflection of an artist, is when you can really capture what your experience is like. And part of being who I am is very much being a passionate sports fan, as I mentioned earlier as well. So you find me at Dodger Stadium quite frequently. In fact, every opportunity that I possibly can, or Laker games, or whatever the case is.
Tell us a little bit about Hurricane Katrina and what got you to say, you know what, I'm going to get up and I'm going to help these people. I mean, we all heard about Hurricane Katrina and we all felt bad, but none of us said we're going to do a concert for them. You did. What happened?
Well, I love New Orleans very much. I always have, being a jazz musician. And also, when you visit that area, which I had previous to Katrina, you really, I don't see how you can not fall in love with the environment and the city and the culture. And I had been doing the Fresno Art Museum's Artist in Residency program at the time, in which I really had a great platform where I would compose music inspired by the art that was being exhibited. I did so on a monthly basis, and prior to my second of 4 seasons there, I was informed by a lot of friends and family that there was the tragedy that was occurring in New Orleans via Katrina. And I really didn't want to see it. So I really avoided looking at the television and going through all that misery until about 2 or 3 days after the preliminary storm had begun. And once I saw the devastation, I was brought to tears, as I'm sure many people were. I think that, is a common human reaction to seeing suffering of other humans. And I felt helpless, which is not a feeling I particularly enjoy. So what I made sure I did is really just try to just the same way I would with my art, is really be in touch with how I was feeling about it and what I could do to remedy at least my own personal helplessness, and then anything I could do to assist the people that were in need. So I went brainstorming, which didn't really take too long, because as a musician, sometimes you're limited with what you can contribute. And for me, it was music and in organized fashion where it could make an impact. And I called on every wonderful musician I knew that was willing to donate their time and their abilities and talents. And we did a benefit concert very quickly after the damage had taken place. In fact, it was one of the very first benefit concerts. It was streamed internationally, and also for the victims of Katrina at the time, which is very touching. We played a lot of New Orleans music, which I was doing at the time, in addition to other material. Featured a lot of people, and was really just touched with how much money was donated, which we donated in turn to the Red Cross and to United Way and organizations like that, which continue to, because the damage with Hurricane Katrina, despite how far we've come from it, is still there, and it still needs our assistance among other organizations and entities in this world. And for me, that was what I could do. It's what I've always felt is important as an artist, is to be responsible for the community that you live in, and not just the local community, but the global community as well.
I'm going to ask you a little tough question here and say, I heard the expression the other day that music saves lives, or music can impact somebody to where it saves that person's life, motivates that person. Is that a true statement in your opinion?
That is a tricky question. I have to say yes, because I think that music has the ability to inspire us in a way that we don't necessarily give it credit for. And it shows up in different ways. So an example of that would be, like for me, hearing like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, or really a lot of Beethoven's work, or whoever, John Coltrane's work. Like that's so spiritually connected, whatever, however you want to define what that even is. But to where it touches you in a way that nothing else can. It's the same way that if you were to look at like Guernica, which is an amazing Pablo Picasso painting, like that, if you allow yourself to connect to that, it can touch you in a way that can completely change your life. Because what a human is doing when they are an artist and a musician specifically is that you're expressing something that is very human and something that you're feeling specifically. So if you have other people that can connect to that same thing, sometimes you don't feel as alone. Sometimes it's something in the music that just inspires you. You know, there's a lot of historical reference to where music is used as propaganda, even to inspire countries to do things, or you know, what is that movie, Apocalypse Now, and they start playing the music and it fires everybody up. You know, it really has an impact. Or a movie like Clockwork Orange, Beethoven, which is a beautiful spiritual music, as I take it, was used in that respect, and then the antithesis of that as well when you watch how Kubrick made that film. And whether it's Beethoven or whether you're listening to Kanye West and you're inspired by something that he says, it's all the same. It's whatever connects to that person. It doesn't necessarily have to be this high-minded symphony. It could be anything, really. So I do believe that to be the case.
Writers, when they get emotional or they get upset about something, some of the best writers will say, I'll zoom the world out, I'll get a pen and paper, and I'll start writing. The same with people who exercise a lot. They'll say, when I get upset at something, I hit the gym and I forget about it. Armen Nalbandian, when something upsets you or when things aren't going your way, are you that type of person to get in front of that piano and say, you know what, I'm going to play music to this and I'm going to forget about what happened?
I used to be. Several years ago. Well, you know what? When I was in high school, I was. And the reason I say that is because I wanted to have that idea of what like this genius musician is, where you're something that hurts you or inspires you in a certain way where you need to do that, and then you come up with this brilliant composition or whatever it is. I don't feel that, at least at this point in my life, that's the way that I prefer to deal with it. Now, sometimes I will listen to someone else's music to get that type of comfort or to be able to zone the world out. I think that for me works a lot better, because sometimes when you're creating or you're trying to set something up or improvising on the piano or whatever the case may be, sometimes you start to lose your way of your true expression because you are so caught up emotionally, and you need to let that emotion be its emotion for itself. So I try not to confuse those two worlds. However, a lot of that expression that will have created that emotion will eventually find itself in some music down the road. It most usually does.
We are running out of time this week, believe it or not, but we have a few more minutes. And I wanted to circle back on something you said earlier, and you mentioned that the last time I interviewed you on the program is your parents would listen to Sinatra. Your parents would listen to music always when you were around. What do you have to say to your parents? I mean, how did they positively impact you?
My parents are truly amazing people that I love and cherish very much. I think it's just putting my brother Ara and I in an environment where we could just have exposure to it. And I think that's the most critical part of it, is that when you're young, that's your most formative education. That's when you're really getting everything. And truly, from your parents is the most just direct source. Even though you may spend more time at school or with your friends, but when your parents are really the ones that are influencing it, that's specific. But my parents were wonderful in the fact that they never said, here, son, come over here and we're going to play this opera for you. We're going to play Sinatra for you. We're going to play Tony Bennett or whatever the case is. It was just on. So my brother and I had a choice whether we were going to experience it on our own terms or whether it was going to be something where we would try to avoid. And a lot of people try to avoid what their parents are doing because it's kind of corny or whatever. But I didn't really feel that. Plus, there's nothing corny about Frank Sinatra and operas as far as I'm concerned. I think it's gorgeous and beautiful. And maybe I wasn't as hip to it when I was young because I wanted to listen to like Public Enemy or Run DMC or something. But eventually, my appreciation grew out of that to where I could put those dots together and figure out that this is truly something special that I'm being exposed to.
So tell our audience members where they can find out more information about you. You've got this new album out. Congratulations. Another one is going to hit the stores soon. Where can they find out more about that? Where can they listen to your work?
Thank you, Sevag. Really, ArmenNalbandian.com. I'm sure even searching my name on whatever search engine of choice that you use will bring up a significant amount of information. And iTunes or Spotify or whatever the case is, Amazon, it's available everywhere to where you can listen to it. And also off my website, ArmenNalbandian.com, there are plenty of links to where they can take you all over the internet to experience some great stuff.
I'm smiling because we can tell you're in a big city because we hear stuff in the background, we hear vehicles, we hear horns. So you're in a big city, and you know what? We wish you well. Thank you for being with us this week.
Thank you so much, Sevag. I truly appreciate speaking with you and truly appreciate being part of the program.
That's all for this edition of San Joaquin Spotlight. As we listen to guest Armen Nalbandian and the big city he's in with the vehicles passing by and the car horns. I'm your host, Sevag Tatiosian. Truly thank you to the volunteer crew that did this production this week and every week. Their names are on the credits, and especially this week. This is our first interview on Skype, and I think it went great. Tune in next week to a new edition.
Say you love me.